Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 286, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, August 16th, 2024. Hey there, glad to be back after a couple episodes off. Nothing exciting going on, just been busy working, but happy to be back here today on the microphone. Get you caught up on some of the latest news. Before I do that, though, if you're looking for some plans this weekend, don't forget to go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. That is where you can find the area's best events calendar. I may be a little biased, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So if you're looking for plans, not just this weekend, but beyond, be sure to go to holycitycenter.com/calendar. If you just want the latest news, you can take off the /calendar part and just see what is there on the front page, bounce around to different categories and get caught up on everything that's happening. This podcast, I can't, talk about everything that's posted. So, whether it's Riverdog scores, from their latest games, or if they've won any awards, restaurant openings, events coming to town, some politics stuff. It's not all in the podcast, like I said, so get over to the website and check it out. As I said, not too much going on to report on, nothing exciting anyway in terms of what's happening with me personally or the website. Business as usual, so let's get into the latest news. A website called reason.com, which I'll be honest, I was not familiar with, but poked around a little bit and seemed to be a pretty legit operation in terms of journalism. They did a multiple part series involving South Carolina police and something that you may have heard about before. It's called Operation Rolling Thunder. It's an annual 5-day law enforcement blitz, as they call it. Basically, police are out in full force and, because they're out in full force, whether they're looking a little extra for reasons to pull people over or not, they tend to pull over a lot, and all sorts of, tickets are written, people arrested for all manner of things. So they did a piece about that. I highly, highly, highly recommend checking it out on your own. The link is in the show notes. You can see some of their other work as well. Now, in addition to them talking about this, other local media outlets have reported on Operation Rolling Thunder before. That's, again, that's why you may have heard of it. But even the Post and Courier did an editorial kind of diving in a little bit more in terms of what the reason.com piece was talking about, which is this concept of civil forfeiture, which you may be unfamiliar with. I didn't really know much about it, and it's very troubling after reading the article. So you don't need a subscription to reason.com. You obviously do need one to the Post and Courier. If you haven't hit your limit, I think you get 5 free article views a month from them if you don't have a subscription. But if you have a freebie, it's a good editorial to check out as well, just for a little bit more background information. And again, the first link, the reason.com one, is free. You don't need a subscription to them to check out the piece or the other pieces related to it. So I'm going to just give it kind of a high level overview. But again, I highly recommend you go check out the piece. So the article, it's part 2 actually, starts with discussing a traffic stop that happened on October 5th of 2022. It occurred near mile marker 77 on I-85. 2 deputies from Greenville County saw a blue Tesla, driving along that route, and they ended up pulling over the vehicle. Now, according to the article, the vehicle was not speeding or driving recklessly. There was no broken, lights of any kind, no expired tags, and the car hadn't been reported stolen. So what was their pretense for pulling this car over? Well, it turns out the only reason that they pulled the car over is because it had out-of-state plates and it was a rental car. So just because it was a rental and had out-of-state plates, that was their reason for pulling over this Tesla. And yeah, believe it or not, that is enough to trigger a traffic stop, especially during this, 5-day extravaganza called Operation Rolling Thunder. And during those 5 days, there's about a 20-mile stretch of freeway between Charlotte, of course, in North Carolina, and Atlanta down in Georgia, into a really tough situation for travelers. Now, when I say a 20-mile stretch, I don't mean, it actually goes from Charlotte to Atlanta. It's a lot, a lot, many more miles than that. But that's just that 20-mile stretch that I'm talking about is in between those two cities. That's how Reason.com was, explaining it to people who may not be familiar with the area. But for those of you here in South Carolina, you're probably familiar at least a little bit with Greenville County. So that's what we're talking about in this specific article. But yes, that area is when a ton of pullovers happen. And as you heard, the pretext doesn't really have to be anything that you would expect from a traffic stop, like a broken light, even though sometimes that's a little suspect. You feel like, really, you need to pull me over for this. But that's all I need. It's just something as little as a rental car with out of state plates. So just to kind of demonstrate how easy it is, the piece mentions there was a police officer in Washington state who put a video out that ended up going viral, saying that if officers stay behind you long enough, when you're driving, they can find a reason to pull you over. So even if you don't have something, glaring like a broken light, or, license plate is obstructed or whatever it may be, they'll be able to find you something. That officer, believe it or not, ended up getting suspended for that video for telling the truth. But in any event, that's sort of what the South Carolina officers did. They were able to find something to pull this car over. Now, I mentioned that the pretext was that they had an out of state license plate on a rental car. That's not entirely true that they can pull you over just for that, but that signaled to them, oh, this is probably someone we should follow. There's a good chance that they may do something, against state law. Maybe they don't know certain laws. Maybe they're not familiar with the speed limit. We can grab them pretty quickly. And they did find something, and it was pretty lame. It was driving in the left lane while not actively passing. Yes, the very little used law where you're not supposed to be in the left lane, aka the fast lane, when you're on a highway, or anywhere where there's two lanes on the same side. Uh, um, you're not supposed to be in that lane unless you're actively passing. Now, how many people are ever actually pulled over for this? The numbers, I'm sure, are minuscule, and it just goes to show that during this, operation that they're doing, they're looking for the littlest things to pull people over for, and that's exactly what they did. So now their next goal, according to the article, after stopping a car, is to find some kind of probable cause to actually search it. So, pulling them over and saying, hey, you were in the left lane for a long time, there's nobody in the right lane, so you're not actively passing anybody, here's a warning, here's a ticket, whatever. They still try to find some reason to go ahead and search the car. So this would require more than just your typical traffic violation. Officers basically have to have a reasonable belief that a crime has occurred. So in this instance, they claim that they could smell marijuana through the vehicle's open window, which of course, is so easy for them just to state. There's no way to prove later on, like, oh, well, you can't prove the officers did or did not smell that at the time. So if they really want to, they can make this up. Not saying that's what these officers did, but, it just shows how easy it was to pull them over and then find a reason to go ahead and search the car. Now, the reason I said, hey, maybe they just made up that reason is because when they searched the car, they didn't find any kind of marijuana or any other narcotics for that reason. There was nothing else, no stolen merchandise, fake IDs, weapons, nothing illegal, nothing raising any flags. All they did find was an unspecified amount of cash, which is not a crime to carry. So when they asked the driver about the cash, the driver and her passenger tried to just explain to them that, hey, they're moving to Atlanta to start a hair business, and that they would later fly back to Charlotte to pick up a car that was currently in the shop. So they're from Charlotte, cars in the shop. They're driving from Charlotte to Atlanta, where they're moving to. They're going to start a business there. And that's why they had this money. They needed the cash to do something with their business. So at this point, deputies, if they doubt the story, they could just continue investigating, look into it further, ask more questions, whatever they need to do, and then maybe they will find a crime there, maybe they won't. But law enforcement agencies that just want to go ahead and keep that cash, and yes, you heard me right, if they want to just keep the cash, they do not need proof of any wrongdoing. So they found the cash, asked them about it, they were given an answer. Instead of continuing to investigate, they can instead decide to keep the money. And that's exactly what happened in this situation. So this is a maneuver that's called civil forfeiture that I mentioned before. It allows the government to take and permanently keep any property it seizes, and no arrest or conviction is necessary. Now, that's the part I did not know. And again, this isn't specific to South Carolina, although this article is kind of putting the finger at this Operation Rolling Thunder and how it certainly smells and seems corrupt in some instances when people's money is being taken, when no crime has been committed, no arrest has been made. So again, if they can just find a reason to follow you or immediately see a reason to pull you over, broken tail light, you know, it's dark out, you don't have your lights on, whatever, whatever silly reason for a traffic violation, speeding, and that I shouldn't say speeding silly, but you know what I mean? Nothing huge necessarily to pull you over. Once they do that, they just have to find a reason to search your car. And as you see, it's fairly easy for them to think of a reason. Oh, it smells like marijuana. We're going to have to take a look. And then if there's cash, it's theirs. So as I mentioned, in addition to no arrests and all that, they don't even have to identify a suspect. So they don't even have to say, like, well, I think the driver is using this cash for like drug deals or something. They don't even have to specify that. It doesn't matter. They can just take the money and they don't have to provide any explanation for, why they're taking it. As long as getting to search the car was on the up and up, at least, in their estimation, everything here is fine. They're supposed to link any seized property to criminal activity. For instance, if they had found, any kind of drug paraphernalia, for instance, they would seize that, and that's related to a crime. They would say, oh, looks like they may have used illegal drugs. They have drug paraphernalia, which they're not supposed to have. That they're supposed to link to a crime, but a lot of the time they don't have to prove anything when it goes to court for this type of civil forfeiture. So, because unlike criminal cases, civil forfeiture requires property owners to, of course, pay for their own attorney, which a lot of people can't afford. So, if they were actually charged with a crime, you know Miranda rights and all that. If you can't afford a lawyer, one will be provided to you. Well, in these cases, because it's no crime has been committed, no arrest, no ticket, nothing has happened, you have to pay for an attorney on your own if you want to try to get your property back. In addition to having to pay for a lawyer, if you can't do that, I should say, it's not like you're going to try to navigate the system on your own. I mean, I'm sure people have tried, but it's not going to go well for you in all likelihood. And because of those two big hurdles, a lot of people just end up cutting their losses and walk away and say, well, I lost that money. It sucks for me, but what am I going to do? And according to the article, this happens in 98.6% of the time when these cases happen as it relates to, say, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which is kind of just waiting on standby to take possession of any cash that is seized during operations like Operation Rolling Thunder. So anytime there's any kind of civil forfeiture during this operation here in South Carolina, nearly 99% of the time, the people involved don't even try to fight it at all. And so that is just taken by the government, whether it's cash or whatever else they decide to take. Now, even if that small percentage, that basically 1% of people, if it actually makes it to a trial, it's still long odds that it's going to be ruled in their favor. It essentially comes down to their word against the law enforcement officers, who, typically will end up testifying that property owners fit the, drug courier profile or, whatever else. They can easily come up with a reason for, hey, we smelled marijuana, found a ton of cash. It's reasonable for us to think this person might be selling marijuana, and so that's why we took the money. And that's really all they need to do is have like a description or a reasoning. So it can't be completely, out of left field, but if they can just make a connection like that, it comes down to, again, the officers versus the member of the public, their word against theirs. And so who's to say if the police did or did not smell marijuana? Who's to say that, how do you prove or disprove that? And so there you go. So even if someone gets to that point, it's a real tough road to go down to try to get your money or whatever else back. And as if that wasn't scary and shocking enough, almost anything can justify a civil forfeiture. So even what I just said, like they kind of have to come up with a vaguish reason. Vague is a great way to put it, because one Florence County deputy actually cited rubber bands as suspicious during a bus search in October 2022. So just because this officer saw rubber bands, that was enough for them to go through this process of civil forfeiture, and that was fine. So it just goes to show that it really does just need to be vague. In another example, an officer faulted a driver for simultaneously talking too much and not enough. So in the report, they said, quote, while being vague about his trip, the driver would over explain other things, end quote. That was enough to justify the officer taking this person's property. Insane. Some other instances, lighting a cigarette during one stop was considered suspicious. So too was smelling like cologne, not even drugs. Cologne was suspicious enough. Someone avoiding eye contact. Another person was being, quote, preoccupied looking for the rental agreement, end quote. And another one was a cluttered vehicle that appeared to be, quote, lived in, end quote. So as you can see, the reasons for deciding it's okay to search a car and then take any property you find in there can be extremely vague. It's very easy to come up with something. And like I said, I had no idea it was like this. Now, any participating agencies, they can keep up to 100% of the proceeds that are seized through civil forfeiture. And then if the federal government gets involved, like I mentioned before, Department of Homeland Security is available during this Operation Rolling Thunder. Um, through a They can actually get some of that money through a process called equitable sharing, and their cut is typically about 20%. So here in South Carolina, you have your money taken. 20% of that might go to the US government because Homeland Security is helping out. The 80% will go to the local agency that pulled you over. Wild. Isn't this completely insane? And yes, as you can imagine, the Tesla travelers that I mentioned at the beginning of the article, that was kind of the focal point of this piece, they did not even receive a traffic citation, let alone get arrested for anything. And they still lost their property. They were free to go, in fact, after Homeland Security arrived, but they weren't allowed to go with their money. So no, not even a ticket, let alone anything more serious than that. And they lost this money that, assuming they're telling the truth, and why, who knows, but assuming they're telling the truth, was money that was meant for a business that they were trying to open, and now it's gone. And to try to get it back, they would have to hire an attorney, try to go it alone if they can't afford an attorney. And at that point, is it going to be worth it if you even get a percentage, even if you got all the money back? Is it going to be worth it based on what you're going to have to pay, court fees, lawyer fees, etc.? So just again, go check out the link in the show notes. It's pretty shocking that this is something that's allowed and how easy it is for them to get away with it. In the Post and Courier, it was an editorial, but it still has factual parts to it. They also mentioned that specifically Spartanburg County Sheriff Chuck Wright uh, goes to great lengths to just kind of leave out important details, not really give the press or the public any explanations, but is happy to go out and brag about how well this operation goes. So happy to be like, hey, we've seized all this stuff, stopped all this crime. Isn't that amazing? But when it comes to details, not super forthcoming about it. And why would they be? Because as you've seen, some of these things are suspect at best. So next time you see these reports about Operation Rolling Thunder or something similar, where police officers are excited about how many tickets they wrote, how many people they pulled over, and more importantly, how much money they may have seized, keep in mind that money that they seize might not have, and in many cases doesn't appear to have involved anything illegal, anything wrong whatsoever. And now there's some poor people, poor, I don't mean necessarily poor as far as how much money they have in their bank, but feel bad for these people type poor, that find themselves in this horrible situation where any amount of money that they may just happen to have on them is taken, and they have almost no recourse to get it back, or at least not um, not a recourse that has a good percentage of them succeeding. So just again, I was shocked to read this story. I highly recommend you go and look into it some more, whether it's this specific one or in other states, and how this whole thing works. But it just seems like how is this okay? How is this allowed? It certainly seems like it's something that maybe was rooted in a good reason. I'm sure there are situations where this type of thing makes sense, but it's taken to the extreme so places can brag about how well they did without explaining how they got to that point, and also get to take money for their organization, which raises a bunch of other questions. But again, check it out. I just thought it was shocking, and I'm sure some of you do as well. All right, now a story that you're well familiar with by this point, I'm sure. Alec Murdaugh, just a couple of updates. The appeals are just beginning for him. We've talked about him a little bit in these appeals processes that he's going through. I can't believe it, but he's almost 3 years into his life sentence already. I didn't realize it'd been that much time since sentencing. For those who don't remember, he was convicted of killing his wife and one of his sons. He got a life sentence for that, life sentence for each, running concurrently. He's almost 3 years into that sentence, but he has two appeals going on right now. One involves that murder case. The South Carolina Supreme Court agreed to hear his appeal of those murder convictions. His lawyers had said that his conviction resulted from jury tampering by the clerk of court, who is the person who watches over jurors, and did so during this 6-week trial. So they're appealing that. So that is being heard, at least. It doesn't mean the appeal will be granted. So there's that side of things. And then in federal court, Murdaugh is appealing the 40-year sentence he was given after pleading guilty to stealing nearly $11 million from clients in his law firm. So his defense attorneys have said that punishment, the financial ones, is 10 years longer than the maximum recommended by sentencing guidelines. So they're saying, number one, it's 10 years longer than the normal recommended maximum, and it's too harsh under the U.S. Constitution. Again, that's according to his defense attorneys. Prosecutors have said it is what is called in this article backstop, in case Murdaugh, who is now 56, ever manages to get his murder conviction overturned. So even if somehow that murder conviction gets overturned, he'll still have to serve a 40-year sentence for these financial crimes, which I'm sure is also helping the defense attorneys in their case by saying, well, that just shows that this sentence is longer than it normally is, and the reasoning for it has nothing to do with the financial crimes themselves. They're bringing in this other aspect to it. So we'll see how that argument goes. You may remember they also argued, putting aside what prosecutors have argued, that with his age being 56, a 40-year sentence is essentially a life sentence, and is the financial crimes he committed, even though he's admitted to them, is that really a fitting punishment, essentially a life sentence for someone for financial crimes? So that's what they're arguing. Now, these appeals will likely continue for years, barring any big surprises. So this is something we're going to be talking about for a long, long time. So don't expect magically two things are going to get overturned and he'll be out of jail much sooner than people thought. It's going to take some time, and it may never, if the appeals may never even be heard, at least not these. That doesn't mean that they can't be appealed on other grounds at another point in time. So that's the latest on the Murdaugh stuff. Just kind of letting you know that, yeah, there's two appeals that are being heard. They haven't been heard yet. It's going to take some time even to get to that point. And then if those appeals are granted, this is just going to continue and drag on and drag on. But that's the latest with the Murdaugh saga. All right, that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you have an amazing weekend. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and also Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in every show. Have a fantastic weekend. Stay safe out there. I should be back as normal on Monday. Until then, good night and good luck.